Wisdom begins in wonder. Socrates said that thousands of years ago. It was relevant then, and it's still relevant today. Maybe even more so. He also spoke to the power of questions to stimulate thinking. I'm a teacher by profession, a teacher by choice. But I'm also an accidental entrepreneur and an accidental everything else. And I'm a teacher who was inspired by teachers. Mr. Thomas, my primary school headmaster in the Athlone area in the Cape Flats, just outside Cape Town, loved teaching, loved Silverley Primary. He loved us. He didn't love late coming. I was 11 years old, and the rule was if you were late, you waited at the gate, and Mr. Thomas met you personally. That day, he marched me off to the office, and as he bent the cane, said, "Put your hand out." I put out my 11-year-old hand. It hurt like hell. And then he said to me, "Why did you get that?" I said, "Because I was late, sir." He said, "No, Mr. Pillai. You got that because you didn't think. You didn't think about the consequences." I said, "Why did you get that? Did you intend to be late?" "No, sir. I've been late before." And he said, life will teach you the toughest lesson of all. If you don't think about the consequences, and don't strive for what you intend. Dismissed. Mr. Thomas is an amazing teacher. He's 77 years old. Sadly, he spends more time in hospital now than he does with his family. He's retired. He still loves education. He's still in touch with many of us as his students. And he keeps photos in his pocket. And he showed this to me when we worked together in Cape Town again. And he said, "Pat, some of my students are still working on it, even those who are still struggling in life." Mr. Govender, my English teacher, newly qualified from University of Durban, Westville, arrives at Rylands High and teaches us English. And he has a talent, an absolutely amazing talent for bringing the written word to life for us. Literature, poetry, but he's just as powerful at making the blank page come to life for us. And when a poem based on state curriculum doesn't quite connect with his students, he pushes it to the side. He might just tick a box another day, but we are the curriculum. He's still in education today, working in Wentworth as a principal. But his ability to inspire us to look at the blank page differently, that's his greatest contribution. And he'd say sometimes, "Okay, open up your workbook, find a blank page. Look at that blank page." And then he'd ask the magical question, "What do you see?" Oh, that's a deep question. It's a blank page. Say, "No, that's not a blank page, ladies and gentlemen. That is your dream. Those are your fears. Those are your aspirations. Those are your questions, the things that confuse you. That, ladies and gentlemen, is an assignment, and it's due on Friday." I finally leave Rylands, and at the time we had to study at particular universities, and I end up at the University of Durban, Westville. I arrive confused. I don't arrive a radical. I came from a very conservative family, a grandfather who was a waiter at the Mount Nelson Hotel, and a mother who was a waitress, or a waitron. I say waitron to her these days, and just, no, I was a waitress. At the Woodstock Holiday Inn. I arrive confused and afraid. I'm away from home, too far away. I'm 17 years old. But it's at university that my real education begins. I study teaching, and after that I'm qualified. But I discover, and that's a man and his brother and a few others who are responsible for the education that happened outside the classroom. And I discover Steve Biko, and he speaks of consciousness, identity, and he speaks of self-reliance. And as I hold my newborn child in my arms, in our little flat, taking care of the 2 a.m. feed. I realize as I hold him in my arms, I may be qualified as a teacher, but I'm completely unqualified in life, and I'm not qualified as a father. I look at him and I know that if he grows up to be the man I am, I will be ashamed of him. I don't last long in the state education system. I leave, and I start an organization that focuses on a humanizing consciousness, identity, and entrepreneurship. Critical thinking is a key part of the program. And we start with just 16 students, and we somehow fail our way forward. For 18 years. To date, we've reached over 80,000 children across South Africa. We have 4,000 young entrepreneurs in these programs, and 120 practicing market-based impact entrepreneurs or social entrepreneurs who use business principles for social and environmental impact. So, what do we do with our entrepreneurs and students? What does it look like? Wisdom begins in wonder, and that's our responsibility. To use questions and to get them to think about thinking. Not just the content of my thoughts, but the process of my thinking as well. Think about thinking. Not just the content of my thoughts, but the process of my thinking as well. And that's a difficult concept. So we play with ideas. We have fun with a few interesting concepts. And it might start with simply asking a few questions. A statement and a question. One like this: fish discover water last. Agree or disagree? Now, I'm not so interested in the answers. I'm less interested in the answers and more interested in your thinking and how you arrive at some of these answers. Fish discover water last. And if you find one answer, one opinion, put that in your back pocket and search for another. What thinking got you there? What biases? What processes got you to some opinion? We'll get back to that later. Another one. The sun rises in the east. True or false? And about 95% of the group at this stage looks at each other and says, of course it rises in the east. I saw it this morning. It'll set in the west, which means it came from the east. It's in our geography books. Science has proven it. The sun rises in the east. We agree. That was easy. About 4% are unsettled. Something's up. And there's that 1% who will say something that will shift the thinking of everyone in the room. And they'll simply say, the sun doesn't rise. It's the earth that turns. And suddenly, everyone in the room has not just got the perspective they had, they've got many perspectives. And we say to them again, think about thinking. The most obvious things may be the things that trap us. We've all seen maps of the earth, continents. We know what they're called. We see, but do we really see? Let's have fun with this. If you remove all these directional indicators, north, south, east, and west, have you noticed that every continent's name starts with a vowel? Think about it. Antarctica is not a continent. Antarctica is. And once you've got that sorted in your mind, have you noticed that every continent that starts with a vowel ends with exactly the same vowel? And here's the bias. That's just in the English language. Think about thinking. Not just the content of my thoughts, but the process of my thinking as well. Now here's a challenge. I want you to undo what just happened in your mind. Go back to thinking about sunrises the way you did before, and go back to thinking about the names of continents the way you did before. Press Control Alt Delete. Undo. It's impossible. Because once a consciousness has been expanded, and these are small things, they're sunsets and they're names of continents. But once you achieve that breakthrough, especially with the deeper consciousness issues, the chances are you are changed forever. Think about thinking. And fish discover water last is an African proverb. And it begs us to ask the question, what do I most take for granted? What is my water? What I'm talking about is metacognition. Thinking about thinking. Cognition about cognition. And at this stage, we break it down a little bit for them. Think of a laptop, you flip it open, and you type a few thoughts. What's on the page is your thinking. What sits behind it is the code that makes it possible for you to have a capital letter, a lowercase letter, some spaces, a full stop, and ultimately a paragraph or two. Without the code, you've got no content. And if there's a glitch in the code, I don't trust the content. Think about thinking. Apps drive so much of what we engage with in the world, those who can afford cell phones. But think of human beings as human applications, each blessed with a unique genetic code, and of course they have a thinking code that they've built up from the time they were this high, all the way through to present day. 7 billion human applications, each unique. What you can't do, though, is force stop. What you can't do is uninstall. But what you can do is upgrade. That's possible. Here's another quick explanation of metacognition. Hollywood spent 3 feature-length films, the movie called Matrix, to get Neo to finally think about his thinking. And when he does, he's invincible. Think about thinking. So, how could we think about thinking right now? What are the tools that we have at our disposal? Amazingly enough, we've got those, and we've had them all our lives. They're called questions. Questions. They're like finely crafted individual tools to pick at our brain and work out the thinking that informs this consciousness. Who is about identification. What is about objective. Where is about location. When is about time or chronology. Why is about the cause. Which is about specification. How is about the method. Powerful tools. They're at our disposal all the time. You know, it was Nelson Mandela's life work that inspired us to seek a partnership with the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and I must give them credit. We have a global rights agreement with the Nelson Mandela Foundation to use his life work as a base program so we can access the deeper level thinking of a young, insecure human being called Nelson Mandela. Yes, he was young too, and insecure. But he did say this in the 70s in a letter that he wrote in prison. He said, "The cell is an ideal place to learn to know yourself, to search realistically and regularly the process of your own mind and feelings." The process of your own mind and feelings. What is your cell? What is my cell? What is the equivalent of the cell that I go into when I think deeply about my thinking before I create my biases, before I design, before I sign off that policy? What is our cell? It's interesting how the greatest among us go inward in order to deal with some of the greatest outward challenges. Some of those we've heard today on this platform. Perhaps we need to rethink ourselves before we rethink the world. Thank you.